sudden, they became Khans.
The great Mongol invasions of the 13th century left traces of devastation. Entire cities were depopulated, ethnic groups enslaved and deported, and Genghis Khan's family became the most powerful in the world. The term Mongol is still used as an insult on social media today, but recently, voices have been growing that no longer deny a certain admiration for these steppe warriors. In juxtaposition with the old, decadent world of settled peoples from China to Germany, the Mongols seem to have been fresh and brave warriors who hired their men and women not according to origin or social position, but according to skill and cleverness. They were closer to nature than the inhabitants of Chang'an and more culturally tolerant than the Crusaders in Jerusalem. Such a similar admiration was held by a certain Timur even before the end of the Middle Ages. More than a century after Genghis Khan's death, this Turco-Mongol set himself the goal of reviving the Mongol Empire. But he himself and his environment in Uzbekistan were nevertheless influenced by Turks, as was the rest of Central Asia. And thus, he combined ancient Turkic culture with elements of the Mongol systems of rule, proclaiming himself emir over Central Asia. Within a few decades, Timur expanded in all directions. He spread fear and terror, especially in the Islamic Middle East, because of his violent ways. But he was a Muslim himself and valued education and the arts. Timur invited numerous painters and scholars to his court, and had beautiful splendors built that still decorate the cities of Central Asia today. His reign was the product of a Turko-Mongol synthesis at its height. But on the way to world domination, Timur had to remove many obstacles. The biggest obstacle was he himself. Central Asia, home of Timur and of numerous other steppe warriors. The term refers to the area between the plains of Mongolia in the east and the transition of Kazakhstan into Ukraine in the west. In our present time, Central Asia is politically divided into states belonging mainly to the Turkic world. Kazakhs, Turkmen, Kyrgyz, Uzbeks are all Turkic speakers, meaning they each speak a different branch of the Turkic language family. Accordingly, most of Central Asia is known to this day as Turkestan, land of the Turks. Although the Turkic peoples, linguistically as well as archaeologically proven, probably had their origins further away in Northeast Asia.
So we use this term Trans-Eurasian, which was previously called Altaic, and we use it in reference to this large group of geographically adjacent languages, stretching all the way from the Pacific in the east to the Baltic, the Mediterranean, and the Black Sea in the west, and including up to 5 different non-controversial linguistic families. So that are the Japonic languages, then we have the Koreanic languages, actually one Korean language. We have the Tungusic languages, and then we have the Mongolic languages. And then, as you know, there's not only the Turkish you speak in Turkey, but there are at least 20 different Turkic languages spoken all across Eurasia.
They settled here after the demise of the Gökturks, spreading the influence of Turkic culture among and along the Caspian Sea. But even before the Turks arrived, Central Asia was a place feared by the sedentary population of Eurasia. The harsh climate, endless steppes and deserts, and the sparse vegetation forced the inhabitants to practice modesty in hunting and to defend their families from invaders until their last breath. This favored their use of bows and arrows because extensive plantation were rarely possible, and so they developed into excellent warriors. Like all the steppes peoples of Eurasia, from Tabriz to Bumin, and from Attila to Genghis Khan, the rulers of the steppe peoples were at the same time a nightmare for them sedentary neighbors. In many epic battles, they spread fear and terror from China to Persia to Europe. At least there was the tenor of these people who saw in the tribes of Central Asia nothing more than a collection of infidel savages. And Genghis Khan may have exceeded their expectations. Within 3 decades, he incorporated large parts of Eurasia into his new empire. Under the term Mongol, many tribes then migrated to the occupied territories. But despite many similarities, the arrival of the Mongols here in Central Asia was not universally welcomed. On the contrary, the majority Turkic inhabitants were victims of sieges and massacres, just as the Chinese were, living 5,000 kilometers away. Cities like Bukhara and Samarkand have been important trading posts along the Silk Road until then. With the arrivals of the Mongols that came to an end, the force with which Central Asia was hit was so great that the region could neither recover economically nor unify politically for decades. But not everything was destroyed in the Mongol invasion. There was also some bright spots in that cloudy sky. The Mongols brought Turks to the cities between Amudarya and Sirdarya, namely those who had previously lived at the Altai Mountains, and the Mongols who had brought with them Chinese who had been enslaved to help the Mongol generals conquer fortified cities with their siege techniques. Central Asia once again became a place shaped by many different cultures, in which a phase of economic recovery was now beginning. Corresponding with these developments, however, was another process that would shape the future of Central Asia even more than the Mongol invasions. A Turkic-Mongolian product, Turko-Mongol, is the correct term used in academia, is the Barlas family, which was comprised of descendants of the Mongol tribe of Orjigin. They shared the same ancestor as Genghis Khan, a certain Bodonchar Munghag, epic warlord of Mongolia. 400 years after his lifetime, his descendants of the dynasty had annexed Bukhara, Samarkand, and the vast surrounding area, thus securing Mongol rule in Turkestan. At the same time, the Barlas also settled in the area. Unlike the other Mongol tribes, however, the members of the Barlas had been sedentary and almost always married their children to members of other tribes. There was no isolation. Since Turkestan continued to be literally inhabited by Turks, the residents then exerted passive pressure on the newcomers to integrate. And so, the Barlas family first converted to Islam, to a liberal variant also practiced by Turks, and then adopted the Chagatai Turkic language. For several decades, the Barlas remained one of the most influential families in Central Asia, controlling the region of ancient Kish, arguably the oldest permanently settled city in Central Asia, in what is now Uzbekistan. The area surrounding Kish was attached to the city of Samarkand, and this in turn was part of the Chagatai Khanate. The state referred to Chagatai, one of Genghis Khan's sons, to whom Central Asia was imposed for administration after his father's death. At that time, the Mongols continued to rule over almost all of Eurasia, but in 4 zones that fought among themselves. The Yuan dynasty ruled over a unified China, Mongolia, Southeast Asia, and Korea. The Golden Horde ruled the Western Eurasian steppe, the Ilkhanate, the Iranian-influenced Middle Eastern region, and the Chagatai Khanate, the trading and oasis cities of Central Asia. In contrast to the other 3 empires, the Chagatai Khanate had a Turkic influence from the beginning, because, as with the Barlas family, other Mongols married and merged with the resident Turks. But by the late 13th century, a period of constant warfare with neighboring states had set in, especially with the Delhi Sultanate. Religious motives were also commonplace. Stability in the empire, secured by cities such as Tashkent, Kashgar, Turfan, and Kabul, began to falter. The grandsons of Genghis Khan were fighting each other for a piece of land stretched over 2 continents. Mongol unity was a distant prospect, and the influence of the Mongols continued to decline due to their assimilation. Then, in 1336, a boy named Timur came into the world in that city of Kish. He was born into this uncertain era, surrounded by wars and expulsions on one hand, and a new Turco-Mongol euphoria on the other. He was nonetheless to rise above and become one of the greatest generals in human history. Whether a terror or a role model, he was in any case a remarkable personality and one of the most interesting figures of the Middle Ages. But how did Timur manage to do this? Nothing is known about Timur's mother, a certain Tekina Hatun, except that she died when Timur was still a child. His father's name was Tarangai, a supposedly lesser nobleman, but one who had influence and prestige. Accordingly, Timur also grew up in a wealthy family. Tarangai is also described by the traveler and scholar Arab Shah as a magnate, i.e. a high-ranking and wealthy nobleman. At the court of Emir Hussein Kara Unas, in the 14th century, the Mongol Kara Unas held sway here before later moving on to Afghanistan. Today's Hazara in northern Afghanistan see themselves as their descendants. In any case, Tarangai was also able to position himself as a good friend of Hamid Kereyid, the leader of the Khanate of Mongolistan. This state has spread in the area north of the Tengri Khan mountain range and was most likely an independent entity from the Chagatai Khanate. Timur's family was thus based in the Chagatai area, but maintained good relations with the hostile neighboring state. This fact, as well as the good position of the Barlas family, was quite conducive to Timur's career. Accustomed to riding and hunting from an early age, he established himself as a talented fighter as a teenager. He had gathered a troop of ambitious young men behind him and whom he had regularly attacked travelers, especially merchants, and stole their valuable and exotic goods. He therefore quickly rose to the rank of mercenary. Son of the popular Tarangai, he engaged in numerous military operations of the Chagatai Khanate, but also allowed himself to be hired by other rulers. The figure closest to him was Khazagan, the successor of Hussein, and now emir over the Chagatai Khanate. This emir maintained good relations with the Delhi Sultanate, which it had helped out with several thousand soldiers to put down rebellions against the rule of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. This event illustrates the precarious yet favorable position of the Chagatai Khanate. On the one hand, it was surrounded by neighbors who were constantly at war with each other or whose rule had become unstable. On the other hand, many of ambitious young politicians saw this as an opportunity for future expansion. One of them was Timur. Around 1360, he started his first major operations. First, he gained experience in a series of punitive expeditions in Transoceania, capturing a lot of money for the emir. He received his share, of course. After Kazangan subjugated the Volga Bulgars, Timur then attacked the Khorasan cities on his orders. Despite the widespread Mongol invasions, not every piece of the land in the former empire was under control of Genghis Khan's successors. Accordingly, Khazagan dispatched the now 30-year-old Timur to subdue the local lords. Timur's 1,000-man army even helped him to go further and conquer settlements in Khwarezmia and Urench. Shortly after, Khazagan was killed by the son of an influential Mongol. As a result, a succession dispute broke out. Tughlaq of Kashgar, who also happened to be named Timur and was Khan of Mongolistan, attacked the Chagatai Khanate from the north and plundered the border region. Timur was sent out to the heirs of the throne to negotiate with Tughlaq and joined him instead. In the process, Timur took his followers with him and received a wide strip of Transoceania as a reward, thus being allowed to rule those places he had conquered for Khazagan shortly before. At the same time, his father Tarangai died. Timur, now endowed with some prestige and above all territory, rose to become the head of the Barlas family. Turko, meanwhile, declared himself ruler of the Chagatai Khanate and eagerly distributed posts. But the coronation of his son Ilyas as the new lord of Transoxiana met with massive opposition, especially from Timur, who had been promised the territory only a short time before. The rulers of Mongolistan was known among their neighbors in the Chagatai Khanate for their ruthlessness. For this reason, Turko had also had to contend with rebellions at home. Seizing the opportunity, Timur allied with his private companion Emir Hussein, grandson of Khazagan, against Turko. Although outnumbered, the two commanders drove the invaders back to the steppes. All these events reveal to us two important facts that were crucial to Timur's career. First, opportunism. Between his first mission in the late 1350s and his victory over Mongolistan in 1363, he had changed sides several times. It did not matter to Timur with whom he allied himself. Rather, he initially sided with the likely victor and then switched sides again as soon as he saw his power in danger, or the possibility of expanding his sphere of influence before his eyes. And associated with this second, meritocracy. For Timur, membership in a particular tribe or linguistic differences were unimportant. Factors that were important in his decision-making: a person's performance, talent, experience, and wisdom. He had joined Khazagan because his father had given him certain privilege, but as his sons vied for power, Timur did not see them as worthy successors. Nevertheless, Timur was not naive. Of course, he exploited his family background in his favor wherever possible, and this includes his kinship with Genghis Khan. Whether Timur was something special from the beginning, did he see himself as the chosen one, who, unlike the other Turco-Mongols, would be a worthy successor to the great rulers of the steppe? Perhaps. But first, he had to prove himself as a local ruler before he could ascend to Khan. Only those who have a good connection to the people will be able to secure their support. After Kish, Balch was the second important city in Timur's biography. Here, in the far north of Afghanistan, he had earned a good reputation as local ruler. Merchants, tribesmen, as well as the religious orders, the nobles, and even the peasants gradually joined him. For Timur was known to share his property, that is, even his booty from battles, with the local inhabitants. He gave some of what he had gotten to others, without paying attention to which social class or religious community the person came from. Accordingly, he behaved in a fundamentally opposite manner to Emir Hussein, his old comrades, who in turn fell into disrepute in his cities for collecting high taxes and using these revenues to erect useless, ostentatious buildings in his name. Hussein was formerly ruler of Balkh, leaving Timur to play second fiddle. Although once companions, Timur and Hussein had quarreled, for the head of the Barlas had proposed to finally defeat Ilyas militarily near Tashkent, but Hussein did not pursue the matter and risked a return of the Mughals. In 1370, the decisive battle between him and Timur took place. The head of the Barlas crossed the river Amu Darya, also known as Ceyhun in Turkish, and surrounded Balkh with his army. Hussein's soldiers rushed outside, not wanting to be in the position of besieged. But this allowed Timur's troops to get inside. They marched into the interior of Balkh at a remarkable pace. After securing all the streets from the defenders, they came to a halt in front of the citadel. Hussein had locked himself in here, leaving the rest of the city, its own inhabitants, to the looters. Hussein came out and offered Timur to leave the area and make the pilgrimage to Mecca. In return, he demanded amnesty for himself. Although Timur agreed, Hussein met the opportunist with suspicion and fled. Timur's men were eventually able to catch him and captured him. He was killed, but at the hands of one Kai Khosrau, who wanted to finish a blood feud with Hussein. Timur could now proclaim himself the new rightful ruler of the city, and since Hussein's wife Saray Kargotun was a direct descendant of Genghis Khan, Timur reached out to her and married her, thus providing economic security for her and her children. Since the other successors to the throne had been eliminated one by one, also with Timur's intervention, Timur intended to declare himself officially Khan of the Chagatai Khanate, and at the same time the rightful heir of Genghis Khan. One coincidence followed the next. Since he had not been allowed to have this proclamation recognized according to Mongolian law, a marriage did not make one the heir of Genghis Khan. He had an original descendant, Soyur Gatmish, proclaimed Khan. In return, Timur took the informal title of son-in-law, Gurkhani. He imitated Hussein and the others, boasted the official title of emir, and henceforth ruled behind the scenes sovereignly over a piece of land in the west and informally over the Chagatai Khanate. Even a blind man with a cane would have noticed that it was not the official Khan, but a certain emir who constantly returned home victorious from battles and who was regularly celebrated as a hero by the people. This happened, among other places, in Balkh, which Timur initially had plundered as punishment, but then rebuilt and chose as a place for political meetings. In any case, no one stood in Timur's way anymore. He had achieved his first major goal, that of sovereignty in his homeland. The second goal concerned the surrounding region. With the Battle of Balkh, he had secured his rule over Transoceania, and he had further great ambitions. Perhaps too ambitious, too big for a small prince like him, surrounded by superpowers, but Timur proceeded step by step in his great campaigns of conquest. His patience would indeed pay off.